I rise today to ask the House to support my amendment number 33, which will cut the $73 million increase in funding for the NATO Security Investment Program. This is simply keeping the NATO funding at the same level as last year's appropriations level. I think this is very important. The United States overwhelmingly contributes more than our fair share to NATO for Europe's defense, and it's time for European countries to pay their dues. While our own border is overrun by border crossers and deadly poisonous fentanyl daily, we continue to send hundreds of billions of dollars to NATO to defend Ukraine's democracy, even though they aren't even a NATO member nation. Investing in NATO security is an America Last policy. All increases in funding should be investing in the United States of America's security and the defense of our own border. President Trump was exactly right when he called on European nations to put the required minimum of 2% of their GDP towards NATO defense spending. Most NATO countries still don't meet that requirement, and the U.S. ends up paying for 70% of the alliance's defenses. This is outrageous. The American people do not like paying for other countries' defense when our borders are overrun daily. The current 2023 defense expenditure for NATO countries has the United States at $860 billion. The United States of America's military is not meant to be the world's police. And as we find ourselves funding a war in Ukraine, when the United States position should be pushing for peace, not paying for and not funding war and death of innocent people, we should not increase our spending and increase the amount of funding by $73 million more dollars to the NATO Security Investment Program. Mr. Speaker, I reserve.
Americans are not fighting and dying in Ukraine. Ukrainians are. And all they ask of the great country they admire and they want to emulate is that we help with equipment and training. Putin benefits from this amendment. Putin, a sociopath who is engaged in the most depraved behavior in our lifetimes, killing innocent men and women, targeting hospitals, targeting schools, showing no restraint. This Congress must stand with Ukraine. This Congress can never be seen as Putin's enabler, and that is what this amendment does. That's what's behind it. The author of this amendment has already said she wants to give zero to Ukraine. So we know the motivation behind the amendment. Let's reject it. Let's stand with Ukraine, and let's make sure Putin gets that message loud and strong with a forceful vote here on the floor of the House of Representatives. I yield back.
Perhaps my colleagues are confused. Ukraine is not a member of NATO. Ukraine has not been accepted into NATO. So why are they using defense of Ukraine for their argument for an additional $73 million increase for the NATO Security Investment Program? That absolutely makes no sense. And if you want to talk about national security, Mr. Speaker, let's talk about the American people's national security. My colleague across the aisle speaks of hostile nations and how they present a clear danger to America's national security. Well, you have to look no further than the southern border. The southern border is where hostile nations are invading our country every single day with poisonous fentanyl, which is murdering over 300 Americans a day. If there's going to be an increase in funding for the defense of any nation, it should be the United States of America's border in defense of American lives. And I would like to add on, Mr. Speaker, my position and the position of most Americans is peace, not funding the murder and death and continued foreign wars, defending other countries' democracies while completely ignoring our own. I ask the House to pass my amendment that keeps the spending level at the same level it was this previous appropriations bill, the same level. An increase in $73 million is another step towards funding World War III. It's another step in United States aggression over a country that is not even a member of NATO in the name of a NATO security investment program. This is absolute madness. It's outrageous, and I reserve. I'll just wrap this up. It's very simple. We're at $32 trillion in debt. There's no need to increase spending over the level that it was last year. Americans are already spending $860 billion for NATO, for the defense of other nations. There's no reason to increase it by $73 million more dollars. My amendment's very simple. It's just asking to keep the appropriation level the same as it was this past year. I ask the House to support my amendment. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield.